Hi, friends. It's Deanna Willison with Our Blooming Catholic Life. And I was a little torn. Do I come to you on Thursday or Friday as a special day? And I said, no, let's keep to our regular schedule. We don't want to mess everyone up. And this will get you excited for the Franciscan holidays we have this week on Thursday, which is October 3rd. So October 3rd is the important part there. We celebrate the Transitus of St. Francis. And then on the 4th, we celebrate his feast day. Transitus is not something entirely unique to St. Francis. You celebrate it for other saints as well. It's the transition from this life into the next. It's just the Latin word for that. And St. Francis had certain scriptures read to him. The brothers were around him. He sent for some things. And so we reenact all that on the eve of the Transitus, the things that he said and did and had done. And so it's a lovely ceremony. We can get to some of that in just a little bit. And then, of course, his feast day, which this year is going to be on a Friday. We have a Franciscan feast on a Friday. And that's kind of exciting. So today, what I thought I'd do, somehow I have neglected to bring to you the Chesterton double volume by Ignatius Press. And it's kind of exciting because it has one of those masters of theology, St. Thomas Aquinas' biography, in the same one with St. Francis of Assisi, which many people don't talk about his teachings, they talk about his doings, which is very, very interesting. So I find it a nice juxtaposition of them together in here. And so the recommendations on the back, we always like to look at them. Number one, the publisher is Ignatius. I normally trust Ignatius. The first recommendation is by James V. Schall, Schall, and he was a Jesuit out of Georgetown University. Then Ralph McInerney from University of Notre Dame. And I've heard those names, but I don't really know those. That's not a Newman Guide College. So let's look at the next one. Dale Alquist. Now that's a name I am familiar with. But then Etienne Gilson. Let's start with who was Chesterton. 1874 to 1936, was a prolific British journalist, poet, novelist, and philosopher, and he was the author of over 100 works. Now, as Father Schall tells us up here, he says, here together in a single volume are the two biographies that many critics consider to be Chesterton's best and the best short portraits ever written of these two great saints. St. Francis of Assisi was originally published in 1923, shortly after Chesterton was received into the Catholic Church. It is a profoundly Catholic work explaining and illuminating the life of St. Francis in a way no other biography has. The spiritual kinship the author felt with his subject enables the reader to delve into insights on the character of St. Francis that have eluded many. St. Thomas Aquinas was written later in Chesterton's career. It is also enriched by the author's unique ability to see the world through the saint's eyes, a view that shows us Aquinas in a fresh way. Chesterton's pen brings the author of the Summa vividly to life, acclaimed as the best book ever written on Aquinas by such outstanding Thomists as Jacques Maritain, Etienne Gilson, and Antoine Pegas. This brilliant biography will completely capture the reader and leave him desirous of reading Aquinas' own monumental work. No two lives are more interesting or more divisive than those of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Thomas of Aquinas. The two stand at almost the opposite sides of how to understand and live the same Christian life. The St. Francis book is especially significant today because it addresses itself on how to reform a corrupt culture, while St. Thomas's book is important because it addresses the problem of disordered minds. Chesterton makes philosophy intelligible and poverty rich. No two short books get at the heart of things better or in a more delightful manner. And so here we see why these books have been put together. Ralph McInerney says it's a great read. Chesterton has a rollicking style. He was an author in love with the English language. Dale Alquist says G.K. Chesterton is perhaps the only modern writer who could grasp these two amazingly different saints. He matches the mind of Thomas and the mysticism of Francis. He puts it all together. And that Etienne Gilson says, I consider it being without possible comparison the best book ever written on St. Thomas. Nothing short of genius can account for such an achievement. And after such great reviews, let's pause here to have one of our rejects of Transitus. This year I tried to combine the almond cookie with the chocolate chip cookie. This was an unsuccessful venture this year. I've done it in the past with a dark chocolate chip cookie. This one did not work. And somebody has to eat the rejects, so And you may be wondering then, what cookies made the cut? This year, because of circumstances, I did not get to make my cookies from scratch. So I did use a sugar cookie box mix. I replaced the butter with almond butter. And still used half the amount of butter, that same amount called for in the recipe, in almond butter. And I added 1 extra egg. And it turned out to be a delightful, subtle almond cookie. I opened the book. It does tell you they are in 1 volume. There are introductions to each. So St. Thomas Aquinas has the introduction by Ralph McInerney, and we were told on the back that he's from the University of Notre Dame. But the introduction for St. Francis of Assisi is by Joseph Pearce, who is more famous for tackling things like Tolkien and Shakespeare. So I'm a little surprised to see him. Very exciting. Thomas Aquinas was released in 33 and St. Francis of Assisi in 1923. So 10 years apart were they written. The portrait of St. Thomas Aquinas was from Fra Bartolomeo, and St. Francis was Margarition de Arezzo. Some ancient portraits there. One was in the late 1400s, early 1500s, and the other one was the 13th century. The footnotes in here. Footnotes. 1986, and the introductions were from 2002. Both of those from Ignatius Press, which we have here. Almost all on one page. The 2 table of contents. But there's a little bit more back here. Let's see what they are. Table of contents. Set up mostly the way we like it, but without the little line or the dots here. It's probably books to be read sequentially since they are biographies, so not that big a deal. Let's see, St. Thomas Aquinas. First we have the introduction, right? Then there's an introductory note. That's very interesting to have an introduction and an introductory note, so we'll have to jump into that. On 2 friars, the runaway abbot, the Aristotelian Revolution, a meditation on Manichees, the real life of St. Thomas, the approach to Thomism, the permanent philosophy, the sequel to St. Thomas. Okay. St. Francis of Assisi has the introduction by Joseph Pearce, but no more, just 1 introduction. Then says the problem of St. Francis, the world St. Francis found, Francis the fighter, Francis the builder, the jongleur de Dieu, the little poor man, the 3 orders, of which I'm one, 3rd order Franciscan right here, namely the secular Franciscan order. Let's see here. The Mirror of Christ. That's a story from the life of St. Clare. Interesting. I wonder if that's literally in here. The Miracles in Death and the Testament of St. Francis. Okay, I'm really here to tell you about St. Francis, but this has turned into a book review of this book. So let's see. Starts out here. Chesterton was a genius in that he knew things he had not learned and learned things the rest of us miss. But how in the world he knew enough about Thomas Aquinas to rewrite this remarkable little book is still something of a mystery, or perhaps only a proof of his genius. Very interesting. Page numbers are at the bottom center, which does lead us to believe that this book is to be read sequentially. The mud on the book is probably mine. Somebody asked me about that recently, if I could tell them when books come shrink-wrapped and when they don't. The reason my book unboxing, I don't literally unbox them, is I've accidentally showed some personal information during the unboxing because they have address labels on them, and so I don't actually unbox them. Some people didn't like the noise of the boxes and the time it took me to unbox them. You can never do everything perfect, and I apologize, but I will try and note for future if a book arrives to me shrink-wrapped in plastic. I will try and know that. I didn't know that was something important to people. Aha! And I've immediately learned something. While it was center bottom, the page number on the first one, sometimes it's only that way on the first one, and then it moves to the upper outside corners. On the left, it has that we're in the St. Thomas Aquinas book, and on the right-hand page, it tells us we're in the introduction, which is interesting because, again, this is 2 books in one, and that is how this book continues, both with numbering and headers throughout. So let's see here when we turn to St. Francis of Assisi. It's going to be book title, chapter title, page numbers upper outside, except on the start of a new chapter. That is a clue. Pretty easy to see when we're at the beginning of a new chapter. Not as obvious as some with a blank page or something fancy. There's no fancy la-di-das in here, no artwork, no scriggly scrolls. I don't think there's any artwork in the whole book. The cover will have to suffice if that's something that you like. We did see about something about the notes, so I thought there were going to be extensive footnotes, but it's pretty hard to find. I found some here on page 308. You can see they're right there. But there really aren't that many footnotes at all. It's like every 5 to 10 pages there might be some. And some are longer, some are shorter. There really aren't that many footnotes. So only when it's essential, which could be why they're not in the back at all. And the book just ends when the book ends. Let's see. So we had that little bit from that first introduction. And then at the end, the start of the next one, it says, to Dorothy Collins, without whose help the author would have been more than normally helpless. The introductory note appears to be G.K. Chesterton himself wrote. Let's see. I think he wrote it himself. Well, that makes sense. And why didn't he write one for the first one? I don't know, but the second one was 10 years later. It's also interesting that you read the second biography first. What's that about? I don't know. The introductory note, though, says this book makes no pretense to be anything but a popular sketch of a great historical character who ought to be more popular. Its aim will be achieved if it leads to those who have hardly even heard of St. Thomas Aquinas to read about him in better books. But from this necessary limitation, certain consequences follows, which perhaps be allowed for from the start. First, it follows that the tale is told very largely to those who are not of the communion of St. Thomas, and who may be interested in him as I might be in Confucius or Mohammed. So they're saying non-Christians or non-Catholics may be the ones reading this. And so it's going to have to be a different kind of book. It may over-explain some things for Catholics. Let's see here. Yet on the other hand, the very need of presenting a clean-cut outline involved its cutting into other outlines of thought among those who may think differently. If I write a sketch of Nelson, mainly for foreigners, I may have to explain elaborately many things that all Englishmen know. Yeah, I know nothing about Nelson, but I'm not an Englishman. Okay, and possibly cut out for brevity many details that Englishmen would like to know. But on the other side, it would be difficult to write a very vivid and moving narrative of Nelson while entirely concealing the fact that he fought with the French. It would be futile to make a sketch of St. Thomas and conceal the fact that he fought with heretics, and yet the fact itself may embarrass the very purpose for which it is employed. Oh, now we see why he had a note. Indeed, that note makes perfect sense. Here, how do you do a biography of a man who fought heretics and yet write it for the heretics themselves? That is a tough thing. So, he goes on to talk about that. Let's see here. Chapter 1 is on two friars. Let me at once anticipate comment by answering to the name of that notorious character who rushes in when even the angels of the angelic doctor fear to tread. Some time ago I wrote a little book of this type and shape on St. Francis of Assisi, and some time after, I know not when or how, as the song says, and certainly not why, I promised to write a book of the same size, or the same smallness, on St. Thomas Aquinas. The promise was Franciscan only in its rashness, and the parallel was very far from being Thomistic in its logic. You can make a sketch of St. Francis. You could only make a plan of St. Thomas, like the plan of the labyrinth city, and yet in a sense he would fit into a much larger or much smaller book. What we really know of his life might be fairly dealt with in a few pages, for he did not, like St. Francis, disappear in a shower of personal anecdotes and popular legends. What we know, or could know, or may eventually have the luck to learn of his work, will probably fill even more libraries in the future than is filled in the past. It was allowable to sketch St. Francis in an outline, but with St. Thomas everything depends on filling up of the outline. It was even medieval in manner to illuminate a miniature of the Poverello, whose very title is a diminutive. But to make a digest in the tabloid manner of the dumb ox of Sicily passes all digestive experiments in the matter of an ox in a teacup. But we must hope it is possible to make an outline of a biography, now that anybody seems capable of writing an outline of history or an outline of anything. Only in the present case the outline is rather an outsize. The gown that could contain this colossal friar is not kept in stock. This is very interesting, and perhaps this is why this book is listed first. So start with Aquinas, because in Aquinas he actually talks about the book on St. Francis, which actually is going to enlighten us a little bit. And it does go on. When it says on two friars, It really is on St. Thomas Aquinas and on St. Francis of Assisi. So his first chapter of this book is about both of these. And that would make sense then to put them together. Well, that's very interesting, and why you read that first. Let's go in a little bit more. Let's see if we can find something in here on the Transitus of St. Francis. Remember, there's no index back here. So we're flying here kind of crazy. And as our church both right now has heresy and is falling in ruins, these friars could be a lovely treat of a book to read and inspire you to do something like maybe take up the Marian Catechist or maybe join a third order of either of these two orders. I don't know. Miracles and Death. That's probably it. 297. Again, I'm flipping quickly because the page numbers are in the upper outside corners. Let's see if we can find. I don't know that the Mirror of Christ talks about St. Clare. Again, there is no index. That would be a fun thing to have an index for it. Aha, the tremendous story of The tremendous story of the Stigmata of St. Francis, which was the end of the last chapter, was in some sense the end of his life. In a logical sense, it would have been the end, even if it had happened at the beginning. But truer traditions refer to it at a later date and suggest that his remaining days on the earth had something about them of the lingering of a shadow. Whether St. Bonaventure was right in his hint that St. Francis saw in that seraphic vision something against like a vast mirror of his own soul, they could at least suffer like an angel, though not like a god, or whether it expressed under an imagery more primitive and colossal than common Christian art the primary paradox of the death of God, it is evident from its traditional consequences that it was meant for a crown and a seal. It seems to have been after seeing this vision that he began to go blind. But the incident has another and much less important place in this rough and limited outline. It is the natural occasion for considering briefly and collectively all the facts or fables of another aspect of the life of St. Francis, an aspect which is, I will not say more disputable, but certainly more disputed. I mean all that mass of testimony and tradition that concerns his miraculous powers and supernatural experiences, with which it would have been easy to stud and bejewel every page of the story, only that certain circumstances necessary to the conditions of this narration make it better to gather somewhat hastily all the jewels into a heap. Oh, so chapter 9, Miracles and Death, have all the miracles all gathered up in a heap. I have here adopted this course in order to make allowance for prejudice. It is indeed a great extent of prejudice of the past, a prejudice that is plainly disappearing in days of greater enlightenment, and especially of a great range of scientific experiment and knowledge. Let's see, I'm looking for Transitus. So it's going to talk about the miracles for quite some time here. Totems, right? Oh, sorry, I'm skipping through and it's still pretty funny. Oh, psychologists, Catholics, strangers, nature strangers. Oh my goodness, there are so many here. Saying that they're almost like fairy tales. Okay. Talks about the reception of the stigmata back on pages 305 and 306. Some great detail. Let's see here. Almost there, I think. Well, no, I guess it's not here. I'll jump down to page 308 and just read you 308 and 309, then you'll have a little bit of the Franciscan book. Round about him stood the brethren in their brown habits, those that had loved him, even if they afterwards disputed with each other. There was Bernard, his first friend, and Angelo, who had served as his secretary, and Elias, his successor, whom tradition tried to turn into a sort of Judas, but who seems to have been a little worse than an official in a wrong place. His tragedy was that he had a Franciscan habit without a Franciscan heart, or at any rate with a very un-Franciscan head. But though he made a bad Franciscan, he might have made a decent Dominican. Anyhow, there is no reason to doubt that he loved Francis, for ruffians and savages did that. Anyhow, he stood among the rest as the hours passed and the shadows lengthened in the house of the Portiuncula, and nobody need think so ill of him as to suppose that his thoughts were then in the tumultuous future, in the ambitions and controversies of his later years. A man might fancy that the birds must have known when it happened, and made some motion in the evening sky, as they had once, according to the tale, scattered to the four winds of heaven in the patterns of a cross at the signal of his dispersion. They might now have written in such dyed lines a more angry augury across the sky. Hidden in the woods, perhaps, were little cowering creatures, never again to be so much noticed and understood. And it has been said that the animals are sometimes conscious of things to which man, their spiritual superior, is for the moment blind. We do not know whether any shiver passed through all the thieves and the outcasts and the outlaws to tell them what had happened to him, and never knew the nature of scorn. But at least in the passages and porches of the Portiuncula there was a sudden stillness, where all the brown figures stood like bronze statues, for the stopping of the great heart that had not broken till it had held the world. Well, doesn't really talk about the Transitus at all. Let's see. Does the Testament of St. Francis talks about some of the discord afterwards? No. Well, I guess the Transitus isn't in here. It's a little sad, but that's not something I suppose that spoke to the author, and certainly other books do have it. Let's see, on 318. For that is the full and final spirit in which we should turn to St. Francis, in the spirit of thanks for what he has done. He was, above all things, a great giver, and he cared chiefly for the best kind of giving, which is called thanksgiving. If another great man wrote a grammar of assent, he may well have been said to have written a grammar of acceptance, a grammar of gratitude. He understood down to its very depths the theory of thanks. Its depths are a bottomless abyss. He knew that the praise of God stands on its strongest ground when it stands on nothing. He knew that we can best measure the towering miracle, the mere fact of existence, if we realize that but for some strange mercy we should not even exist. And something of that larger truth which is repeated in a lesser form in our own relations and with so mighty a maker of history. He also is a giver of things that we could not have even thought of for ourselves. He also is too great for anything but gratitude. From him came a whole awakening of the world, and a dawn in which shapes and colors could be seen anew. The mighty men of genius who made Christian civilization that we know appear in history almost as his servants and imitators. Before Dante was, he had given poetry to Italy. Before St. Louis ruled, he had risen as the tribune of the poor. And before Giotto had painted the pictures, he had enacted the scenes. That great painter who began the whole human inspiration of European painting had himself gone to St. Francis to be inspired. It is said that when St. Francis staged his own simple fashion nativity play of Bethlehem, with kings and angels in the stiff and gay medieval garments and the golden wigs that stood for halos, a miracle was wrought full of Franciscan glory. The Holy Child was a wooden doll, or a bambino. It was said that he embraced it, and that the image came alive during his arms. He was assuredly not thinking of lesser things, but we may at least say that one thing came to life in his arms, and that was the thing we call the drama. Save for his intense individual love of song, he did not perhaps himself embody this spirit in any of these arts. He was the spirit that embodied. He was the spiritual essence and substance that walked the world before anyone had seen these things in visible forms derived from it, a wandering fire as if from nowhere, at which men more material could light both torches and tapers. He was the soul of a medieval civilization before it even found a body. Another and quite different stream of spiritual inspiration derives largely from him. All that reforming energy of the medieval and modern times that goes to the burden of Deus est, Deus pauperum. His abstract ardor for human beings was a multitude of just medieval laws against the pride and cruelty of riches. It is today behind much that is loosely called Christian socialist, and can be more correctly be called Catholic Democrat. Neither in the artistic nor the social side would anybody pretend that these things would not have existed without him. It is strictly true to say that we cannot now imagine the world without him, since he has lived and changed the world. There's one more paragraph. I'll let you read that. I probably shouldn't have read that much. I may cut some of that out. May not. Oh, friends, let's end it with St. Francis's prayer before all the orders. In the name of the Patris, Affiliate, Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Almighty, immortal, just, and merciful God, give to us poor creatures to do for you that which we know to be your will, and to will always that which is well pleasing to you, so that inwardly purified, illumined, and enkindled by the flame of your Holy Spirit, we may be enabled to follow in the footprints of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, and by your grace at length attain to you, the Most High, who in perfect Trinity and simple unity live and reign, God all-powerful, forever and ever. Amen. In nomine Patris, Affiliate, Spiritus Sancti.